Hello, this is
Hi.
Rabbi Yoshofa Oliver here with Mrs. Shoshana Silko from Melbourne, Australia, and I am broadcasting from Berlin, Germany.
Yeah.
And we are here to discuss the events of the recent months, starting around February until today. And Mrs. Silko has been very active in questioning the official narrative of COVID, and I give her a lot of credit for that. And
Call me
so
Shoshana. Call me
let's
Shoshana.
talk. Shoshana,
Yeah.
what what was your first indication that the official story was uh, was not correct?
Well, at first, when it first started, of course, I was scared like everybody else. I didn't know anything. None of us did. And I've always been skeptical of the mainstream media. And what really alerted me at first was how people were acting. People that I knew who were generally very reasonable and rational suddenly weren't. And people I knew, such as friends and even members of like the elite of the rabbinical establishment in our community, who would always encourage questions and suddenly didn't. And it's sort of like that fable of the emperor has no clothes. I was like the little boy saying, hey, look, but that's not true. The emperor doesn't have any clothes, because I was doing research online and things weren't adding up. And then what happened was I was having a discussion with one of the members of the rabbinical establishment, and I I pointed out just logically that to me it didn't make sense to close down the entire economy for for this, because the collateral damage of a lockdown would result in just as many or perhaps even more deaths. At that time we didn't really know. And the reaction I got was astounding. It stopped me in my tracks, took my breath away. I was actually told that that type of thinking was Nazism. Yeah. So I knew something was wrong. And then, of course, if a person, see, I could understand if people don't have information, we can all learn. But if a person refuses to actually take time to research, and they're in a position where they're actually encouraging other people, whether you're a government official or you're a community leader or you're the head of a family, you're responsible for other people, or you're head of an institution, and you're asking them to give up things in their life, to give up rights, to give up a lot of things in their life that they take for granted and that they deserve to take for granted because they either earned it or it's their right, it's their human right, then you better actually be able to tell them why. And it's your responsibility to tell them why. And if you can't even answer the questions, and then I was told that I was selfish. And so I started to realize that there was a lot of virtue signaling going on, that many of the people who accused me of not caring about human life were people who had nothing at risk from a lockdown, that they didn't have any loss of income because they either worked for the government or they worked for an institution that was still paying them, or I'm a businesswoman. So I think a lot of this is also how it affected different classes of people. And I do notice as a business owner that a lot of the business people that I speak to are also very skeptical of the narrative, because when it affects your life to that degree, you look at things differently. If you're nice and comfortable and it's not affecting your life, then you can virtue signal all you want and tell other people that they should stay home and they should stop working. And then I just got involved in the community. I looked at your videos and other people's videos. And, once you start seeing a certain perspective, then you become more empowered because other people see it too. At first, I was alone, but they become more empowered because you see other people see it too. And the information is out there. I mean, you'd have to be illiterate or lazy or both not to see the information that conflicts with the mainstream narrative, or willfully blind, put it that way. So that's it. Now, when it first happened, I actually had an
Yeah.
operation. Yeah. Yeah.
I you can't think about these issues independently without seeing glaring anomalies in the official story. You couldn't have from the outset. The To me, the flaws were obvious from the outset, and the fact that people were insisting on accepting the official story was suspicious, and it was worrying from the outset. The acceptance of the official story was fanatic from the beginning.
Yeah. And then a lot of weird things went on. What they did in our community was a few of the rabbis got together who were never in a position to actually be in charge of communal issues, and they sort of got together in this ad hoc community, and they put together a letter telling us that we can't go to the synagogue and we can't, and the schools are closed and all these other restrictions. And some of those restrictions were actually more draconian than the draconian Victorian government, which was really unbelievable, because Victoria is about one of the most draconian COVID restrictive places in the world right now. And that was completely irrational. And they insisted that they discussed it with medical authorities. And I saw a half a dozen GPs on the list. That's what it was, general practitioners. Now, I'm nothing against GPs, but the truth of the matter is the average GP, in my opinion, doesn't know anything about this. They're not epidemiologists. They're not infectious disease experts. They're good for your runny nose and giving you antibiotics and sending you to specialists. And they're just going along with what's politically correct. Two of those, by the way, have since completely turned around since that time. And other people in other communities were actually still engaging in all those activities. They weren't as restricted as our community was. And then there was another Frum community that is also very religious, and they were very clever, because what they did was they didn't just accept the government narrative and follow like sheep. They said, okay, we're going to see how we can continue doing these things legally and still serve our community and not give up our practical communal activities. So they found loopholes. For instance, it was legal if you had a therapy group. So they made a therapy group. They called it a therapy group. And who's going to say it isn't therapy? If Jewish people have to gather in a quorum and pray, maybe that's their therapy. And so it was accepted by the community. And they actually got criticized for that. They were actually bullied for that. And I actually admired them for it, because I thought that they were standing up for principles. And the other thing was, the other really, really ridiculous, I started to realize pretty quickly that this was a real hysteria, something I've never experienced before. Because when you try to breach the inconsistencies with people, you were basically, the reaction was totally emotional and over the top. Like in our community, in most communities, you have what's called 6 degrees of separation. People know each other because they know this one or they know that one, and there's some connection. In our community, I'd say it's less. It's 3 degrees of separation. In the religious Jewish community, people know each other.
You mean to say the Melbourne Chabad community?
That's correct. I'm talking about the Melbourne Chabad Lubavitch community. So we have a lot of people are very acquainted and related to and connected to people in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, which is the headquarters of Chabad, where we were hearing a lot of people were passing away and getting sick. But what we weren't hearing was, well, what were the circumstances surrounding it? What we kept hearing was, there's various websites in our community that just kept sensationalizing it. Every time a person passed away, they would say they died of COVID. And then I started to realize that most of these people were on average 80 years old. Now, it's not callous or cruel or selfish to say that people of that age are often susceptible to passing away. It's just the natural part of life. And most of them did not die of COVID. They died with COVID. And what happened was, a friend of mine actually did research and counted the number of deaths in that particular neighborhood and compared them to previous years, and there weren't actually more deaths. at all. What happened was they passed away in a much shorter period of time during the COVID crisis. And we found out later on that they were actually being mistreated in the hospitals, and that's a whole other story. But what happened over here in Melbourne was every time we had hardly any cases. We had somebody come back from New York. He went to the synagogue. He ate there. He shared his cup of ritual wine with people. He had to quarantine. Maybe 1 or 2 people got sick. They had, I would say, the equivalent of a cold for 2 weeks, and that was it. We have no cases for months now. We have no deaths, thank God. So you cannot compare another country, another city to every place is different. And I just think that once people's emotions get riled up, it's very hard to undo it. And the other thing was we get the rabbinical stamp telling us that we have to do this because it's what's called pikuach nefesh. Now, I actually took the time to look up pikuach nefesh, and I found out, I can't find the source. I could find it if you give me time, but I happen to know that it has to be, in order for it to be a plague, pikuach nefesh means you have to do almost anything you can, even break Jewish law to save a life. In order for there to be a plague, there has to be a number of deaths. There has to be 3 out of 10,000 deaths per day. And we were never anywhere near that, not even in New York. So there was never a plague, and there was never a reason to do all of this, even under Jewish law. But what happened was I actually wrote about this in my blog, therepentingjewess.blogspot.com, and I sent it to a whole bunch of rabbis. And not only didn't they answer, they ignored it completely. Nobody even replied that they received the answer. So, yeah, that's what happened here with me.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. The way that people stopped using their normal thinking ability and just refused to discuss this topic rationally is just been unbelievable. And the question is how are we going to wake people up?
Well, I think people are waking up. It's very difficult for some people to admit that they made a mistake. I had one woman come to me and tell me that she was very against what I was writing and saying in the beginning. But then what happened was her father got COVID, or was diagnosed with COVID in New York, and he took hydroxychloroquine and he was cured. So then she started to think, in Australia, they banned HCQ. We're not even allowed to get it. So why are they doing that, she thought. And then she realized, oh, must be some sort of corruption going on here. Because why would you ban it? So one thing led to another, and she started to realize, oh, the government is being authoritarian here. They're being totalitarian. There's a reason behind it. And then the whole thing starts to unravel. It's not very hard to unravel the narrative if a person, but it has nothing to do with intelligence. I'm not much more brilliant than a lot of other people. It has to do with having the ability to control one's emotions and actually look at facts. And the information is there once you look at the facts. I'll tell you another thing that happened. So at the end of June, June, beginning of June, really, we got a letter from the rabbis, as I said. And at that time, they told us we can only do the men could go to the shul for a quorum for the afternoon and the evening prayers. No, at that time, sorry. At that time, it was originally only for the morning prayers. And that went on for a few weeks. And then a few weeks later, they said, no, you can only go now for the afternoon and the evening prayers. So some of us were joking, some of us who are a little bit more skeptical, like, what happened to the morning prayers? Like, does the disease know that it's more susceptible in the morning? So they heard that people were saying that. So they sent out another letter saying, the reason why you couldn't go to a quorum in the morning prayers was because the morning prayers are longer. So you have a tendency to want to sit there longer. So, and you're also bringing your phylacteries, your tefillin bags. The men have these prayer bags. And that means that there'll be more close contact between the prayer bags, the phylacteries, and the seats. To me, this was wild, okay? Because this is not science. This is already voodoo. Now, I didn't grow up in a religious background. I went to secular school and I studied a little chemistry, a little biology in university. And I think part of the reason why we have such a block towards, logic and reason here is there are many religious people and rabbis who are extremely brilliant people, and they have incredible Torah knowledge. But the fact of the matter is, not once in their life have they ever opened up a biology textbook. No, seriously. So they depend on, like, to them, if a GP has a degree, they think that that person is like, he knows everything, even if that GP just repeated what he saw on the news and he didn't look into it. And if you already have a little bit of knowledge, you don't have to have that much knowledge to understand that that makes no sense. You just don't catch a disease that way. Even during the AIDS crisis, it didn't happen. I was in New York. I'm older, I'm a grandmother. I was in New York during the AIDS crisis. That didn't even happen. So it's completely, it went into the whole like Twilight Zone, absurd, completely absurd realms.
Yeah. I had a whole conversation with a nurse who's also a Chabad woman, and she can't really read Hebrew, but she has a very deep critical understanding of these issues, and she she was just talking about how absurd what the rabbis are saying is, and yes, to discuss these issues, you need at least some basic background in science, and it's absurd that rabbis don't have it, are expressing any opinion at all, even to side with the government or to just discuss it at all. It's not their place to discuss. They could present a view, but not in authoritative.
They can express a view, but if they're going to tell me that, oh, you muted yourself, you have to unmute. They can discuss a view, but if they're going to tell me that I can't live my life as an adult, and they're going to treat me like a child that can't take care of my own health, then at least answer my questions and explain yourself. And if you're not going to do that, then you're just being a little dictator. Maybe that sounds a little harsh, but who are you to tell people? If you can't even explain why, you're not acting any better than our premier, which is the head of our state, who's a complete dictator. Another thing that happened was I was in the hospital during this time. I had an operation in July. I was in a private hospital. And I noticed that in the hospital, the nurses, they weren't scared of COVID. You know what they were scared of? They were scared that they would have to take a COVID test, or that I would have to take a COVID test. And if somebody's positive, then they can't work for 2 weeks. That's what they were scared of, because they'd have to be in quarantine. And they almost stopped me from having my operation, because they called up, they saw on that my COVID test, I had to have a COVID test before the operation. It was required. They saw that there was no result. It was inconclusive. And I almost didn't have my operation. And then later on, when I was in my hospital bed, one of the nurses came in and saw my record, and she started to get very agitated. She's looking around and she's making sure no one hears her. She says, "Oh no, you didn't have a COVID test. If you're positive, then I can't work. Then my partner can't work." She closes my records, and she just like quiet. She doesn't want anyone to know about it. And I never got tested. It's a joke. If this was really a plague, these people care about health, okay? If it was really a plague, they wouldn't be behaving this way. However, I have a niece who works in the public system, and she is completely paranoid. You see, there's the difference. The public system is run by the government, and if you work there, you're completely inculcated with the government narrative. But the private system is not. So that was another big red flag to me, that this is just bull dust.
The question about like if the coronaviruses were really so deadly, then why weren't people wearing masks in past years, and why weren't people doing tests in past years? It's just the questions are so blatant that it's just absurd.
Yeah, and then what happened was, they made masks mandatory. I got a exemption, and people were very hostile. I was in a parking lot, and this man started screaming at me. This older man started screaming at me, "Get out of here!" He's cursing at me. I gave back as good as I got, and so I have an exemption because I had this operation. So I was able to get one because I went to a GP that's not brainwashed by the narrative. So there are sort of ways to get out of it. And then what happened was, my husband and I attended a protest, an anti-lockdown protest, and we were harassed unbelievably by the police. I have videos on it. And yeah, they have gone completely communist here. We actually have no rights anymore. We don't have freedom to protest. We don't have, well, they're easing the restrictions a little now, but they're threatening to bring them back. We had curfew. We couldn't have visitors. We couldn't travel more than 5 kilometers. And they were giving out draconian fines. But worse than that, they were violent. I went to 2 protests. One of them, they almost arrested us, my husband. The other one, we couldn't get through because there were a lot of horses there, but I saw later on that they were actually brutal. So it's a police state that's happening here now. And so it's just amazing to me that the establishment in our community is going along with the police state, considering our history. We have the largest population of Holocaust survivors in the world outside of Israel. You would think that the people here would actually have an understanding of government oppression and what happens when we go along with it.
Unfortunately, it seems that in Melbourne, it's the other way around, which is that the mentality psychologically is that they feel that they're safe in Melbourne. They feel that Melbourne protects them. And the thought that in reality, that same oppression could exist in safe Melbourne is so frightening that they're in denial.
I think that's right. I think that they're terrified that it could not the same history repeats itself, but never in exactly the same way. But it does repeat itself. And yeah, there was a few other things that I wanted to talk about because I took some notes because there's so much that's going on. You know, I'll say to people, you know, I'll bump into people and I'll say, hi, you know, and I'll just say casually, you know, the government's lying, don't you? You know that, don't you? Some people kind of look a little bit uncomfortable and they don't want to talk to me. Or some people go, yeah, I guess so, but what do you mean? So I tell them a few facts. It's very simple. Last year in Australia, 900 people died from influenza. They estimate approximately 1,500 to 3,000 people die of influenza every year in this country. 240 around of them were children. How many children died from COVID? 0. Right now, in a country of 25 million people, we have 900 approximately COVID deaths. But let me tell you about those COVID deaths. A friend of mine told me today that a relative of hers passed away in the hospital, and they wanted to put on the death certificate, COVID death. And she said, wait, my relative didn't die from COVID. And they said, oh no, if we put down COVID deaths, we get $29,000 and you get $10,000 for the funeral. So this is complete corruption that's happening here. And the whole point of it is what people have to understand about Australia is that Australia is very closely connected to China. We're geographically close to China. China drools over Australia. They say a beautiful Western country that they'd love to get their grits in, which they've already had many ways. We don't know how many politicians are basically compromised by them. And so the methodology of the brainwashing is very much like the Chinese communists, as well as the police tactics, straight out of the Chinese communist playbook. And it's extremely frightening to the point where we think maybe we should leave. Problem is this is going on all over the world, but I do think that if Donald Trump wins, that things will get a bit better over there. And I actually really feel sorry for a lot of people who've been psychologically, I think they've been psychologically brutalized. They literally have, and I don't know. I'm not saying they're depressed, but they're traumatized, and I don't know how they're going to get out of it. When is this ever going to? How are they ever going to get back to normal life and not have these fears anymore?
You have to wonder how much oppression people will take before they realize that the official story is suspect.
Well, the premier here, apparently is very popular. I don't know if I believe that either. Um, and also, it's a different culture here. It's not America. Australians are by nature easygoing, go along with, get along kind of people. They're not going to go in large numbers like you see in America protest or Europe protesting in the streets. But they do different things. There's a lot of legal action going on now. And there's a book out now by a Australian who quit the government called The Great Hysteria and the Broken State, because he was a bureaucrat in the government and he saw that this was just something he could not be a part of. And he wrote the book in 2 weeks, just got a copy of it. And interestingly enough, what he points out in that book is that every state has pandemic policies in place. They all do. And he said the official pandemic policy of Victoria actually states that lockdowns are negative and that they kill people. But what happened when this occurred was they completely ignored their own pandemic policies. And so when they use authority, they say the chief health officer, that's what the police kept saying to us. We're breaking the law. Why are we breaking the law? Because you're going against the chief health officer. They will only pick bureaucrats that support their political agenda. So the other day I was talking to somebody in our community and she said, this is all so strange. I said, not really, if you know history. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, the Nazis had science, didn't they? They used eugenics. They taught it in all the universities and they taught it in the public schools. They had complete belief that this was scientifically proven that the Germans were the master race. It's just the same pattern. It works. That's why they're doing it, because it works.
Yeah, people don't look to history when they interpret current events, and then they learn the hard way.
So as it stands now, I feel our only hope is that if Trump can solidify his election, which I believe he won, I do think that that will help the world in general, because the world does follow America, and I know Australia follows America. And I also hope that people will start waking up, because now they're saying that they're going to keep masks mandatory for an indefinite period. We're going into summer now. It gets really hot. People do not want to wear masks. They just don't. So that's basically about what's going on here in Melbourne, Australia. It's really pretty unbelievable, because when I came here with my Australian husband in 1997, it was a beautiful, fantastic, free country. And, people don't realize that that is not something that's just automatic, that sometimes it's tested and you have to fight for it. I am a bit of an outlier in the Frum community. It's interesting that Chabad, which is so sophisticated and forward, and the most modern of the Hasidim, is actually the most backward when it comes to this here, as far as understanding the issues. And I hate to say that, but it's true. Other Frum communities, even ones that are more insulated than us and ones that are more modern than us, tended to be much more reasonable. And I think part of that is, and I'm going to say this and people aren't going to like it, but that never stops me. Part of it is the addiction to two things: PR and government funding. Yes, we need to have good PR because we're the face of Judaism. That's our job in the world. We go out and we tell people what Judaism is. And yes, we need government funding, but we don't sell out to them. And that, I think, this is brought home to us very strongly. And speaking of government funding, one of the ways they're able to keep the people passive here is that they're giving them what's called JobKeeper, which means they still have their job and they're getting paid, but they can stay home. So many people are very happy to continue. Meanwhile, they're bankrupting the coffers of the country. JobKeeper will end in March, they say. And when that happens, I do think there'll be more of a protest, because people are going to start getting really desperate. The economy is completely decimated at this point. We see it in our own business, and we talk to business people all the time, and many are not going to survive. They've already got finished. So that's also very painful.
Australia in general is a socialist economy, a socialist country,
Very
and
much so.
also not just schools. All private schools depend on government funding, not just the Chabad school, any private school.
That's true. That is true. I think there was a missed opportunity with our leadership. I think if our leadership had actually somehow bounded together with the Muslims and the Christians and demanded at a certain point their religious rights, the Muslims did. The Muslims here did. They were marching. And the reason I think is because they come from oppressive countries. They remember it. And all the Russian Jews that I know are telling me this is communism because they know what it's like. So the Australians who take it for granted and they think they live in La La Land are in for a rude awakening.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
all the Russians almost all the Russians I know are very receptive to my message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They see right through it. Yeah.
But the people with the history of Nazis, like the Holocaust, it's too far in the past,
Yeah.
and there was people that their government they trust in so much could be lying to them so much.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. There was a rabbi here who remained nameless, but he's quite prominent. He actually put out a text to the entire community that if you see anyone breaking the rules, call the police. Now, this is to a fellow Jew, and this is a big prohibition against Jewish law. You're not allowed to dub people in, we call it in Australia, to be a snitch. It's a very bad thing. And he was referring in particular to the other religious group that were conducting a synagogue and other things legally. They were doing it legally. But the newspapers, some anti-Semitic journalists, made a bunch of lies that they were doing it illegally. But no one got fined or arrested because it was fine. Now, he must have heard through the grapevine, maybe from something I wrote, because I was very vocal and I sent it to him, everything, because I thought this was completely beyond the pale, that you tell Jews to snitch on Jews who are praying, who want to, you could sit in a restaurant in Australia at a certain point, but you couldn't go to a place of worship. I felt it's a war of religion. And if we don't stand up for our religious rights, what do we stand for? So a couple of months later, he wrote the reason why it was correct that he said you could snitch on your fellow Jew was, listen to his logic. This is not like living in the Soviet Union when they were trying to destroy religion and we had to fight against all the Stalinists and all the horrible things there, stick up for our religion and keep Judaism alive. It's not like that, because our government, we're so happy and lucky that our government's looking after us. That's what he said. Now that's a child's view of the world. It's a child's view of the world. How is this person in a position, go do your teaching, go do your other things, but don't start telling the community these things when you do not have any idea what you're talking about. There's a last thing that the premier in this state, Dan Andrews, cares about is our health. It is all about power and his agenda. That's all it's about. Because if he cared about health, he would be looking at the suicide rate, which has gone up tens of hundreds of times. The people who are not getting care for cancer and heart disease, who are going to die because they're not getting proper medical treatment because they're too scared to go to the hospital. The people who are I don't know, it could go on and on. I believe the lockdowns, people have done statistics on it, look it up. The lockdowns have killed many more people than the virus, and it will continue to do so. And I was so happy when I saw somebody like you and Rabbi Yitzhak David Smith and Rabbi Michael Green, because I realized not all the rabbis are out to lunch. At least we have some that are still have their critical thinking faculties.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's one thing to be naive about government corruption, but it's another thing entirely to impose that naivete on everyone else in the name of Jewish law. That's just unbelievable.
Very well put. And a lot of it has to do with, I'm a woman, and I'm not saying that I don't feel that our community is sexist per se. I mean, I'm not treated as a second-class citizen. However, I do think that there is an element of sexism, which I mean that I think a lot of people, men in these positions, really don't want to be told by a woman. I get that feeling. They don't want to be challenged at all by anyone. And then they pull the card of, you don't know, you don't have Torah learning. You don't have Torah learning. But I have common sense. And if you have so much Torah learning, then why don't you actually explain yourself? Even it says in the Torah, the Rebbe said, you should ask a Rav, a Jewish, a person who knows Jewish law, the rabbi, you should ask him, from where do you derive your source of, your conclusions? Explain it. Now they can explain everything else, why we can wear what we wear, the holidays, what we eat, but suddenly they can't explain this. So to me, that means they don't know themselves, or they're hiding something, one or the other. Some of them, it's self-interest, I think, that they want to look good to the government, and they feel that they are going to compromise their position somehow if they don't go along. They're afraid. Others have other motivations. Some are like this rabbi, who is just really like this rabbi I talked about, who's just really completely uneducated and unaware about how the real world works. And I know there's going to be people who are not going to like this when they see this. I know it, but it's okay. I'm my own best friend.
I agree totally that these people who don't have an education in history and in even more recent history of government corruption, all kinds of scandals in the government, all kinds of scandals to do with public health, they shouldn't be expressing an opinion on the matter without thoroughly considering it. And at least when someone approaches them and tries to point out, more information than the official story, they should be open to listening to it. But when they just silence you, it shows that they're completely they're completely not fulfilling their function as leaders.
So as of now, we have our international borders are virtually closed. Just to give you an example how that impacted our business, we had Virgin Airlines, which was one of our main customers in our business, so that's done. Interstate, which is ridiculous. We've got 7 states here. They're all acting like little countries, closing borders. Every premier is acting like a little potentate in their own way. And we have a prime minister who's completely feckless and cannot do a thing to stop them. So it's like the whole country's basically falling apart. And I don't really know what's going to put a stop to it. I try to tell people this is not the Australia you grew up in.
Not the Australia that I grew up in.
That's right. That's right.
It's just beyond bizarre. It's a nightmare. It's incredible.
And you're called a conspiracy theorist. You're looked at as dangerous. Now they want to do mandatory vaccinations. Australia is like an experimental place. Australia is the kind of country that they go to when they want to try out new products or new medicine or new medical technique, because it's got a very sophisticated infrastructure. It's got a good cross section of a population, so it's a good place to try something. And I believe that they're trying here to see how it goes. The globalists. It's a fight in the world between globalism and nationalism.
Australia's beta testing the imposition of all-out police state tyranny and a mandatory vaccine.
That's correct. I don't think that ultimately they would succeed, because I'm an optimist and I have faith, but I think we're in for some hard times.
Yeah.
I have grandchildren.
So, what's going to be with the vaccine? It's horrific. It's really
Well,
Good, good.
there are people who are already appealing to, not make it mandatory here. Once the prime minister slipped and said it's going to be mandatory, and he got a lot of flack, so he's pushed back on that a little bit. But I think he was saying what he was really thinking, and that's it. I don't know.
Well,
And
he was floating it.
yeah, it could be it also. Could be it also. So
Well, Hashem should save us from this evil tyranny that is taking over our world.
he has to.
And
It's interesting because what's happening now in Australia is in New Zealand, there's a very left-wing prime minister. Her name is Jacinta Ardern, and she copied the Chinese communists in her approach there. She went for complete elimination and completely locked down New Zealand. Then our premier followed her, and Joe Biden is following us. That's what he wants to do in America, what we did here. He's already talking about mandatory masks. So even though we're 12,000 miles away from America, I don't know who's going to see this video, but this is a global problem.
Yeah, they're all following a script.
Yeah, if you look at the media, they'll all say the same thing. They repeat the same thing. So I think ultimately, it's going to come down to whether or not people are going to actually rebel or not. That's it.
Have you seen any rebellion amongst anyone else in the community?
I think my husband and I are probably the only ones who went to protests in the community. There are people, there's a few other people. One of the doctors who actually signed one of the papers, his son is a big activist in this, Mendy Goldman. There are a few of us. We are in a minority. I think I get the feeling when I talk to certain people now is they're uneasy. At first, they were very strident. They were ready to call you all kinds of names and tell you that you're crazy and selfish and dangerous and a conspiracy theory. Oh, one guy, you know what he did? He ran to the rabbis and he ran to some WhatsApp group and said that Shoshana Silkov is against the Rabbanim. That's a big insult. I was against the rabbis, to try to silence me. But that didn't last very long. It didn't silence me either. I'm not against the rabbis. I just think that the rabbis are, look, we have a precedent. If you study Jewish history, the Shabtai Tzvi, when everyone thought he was the Messiah, and they were all packed and ready to go to follow him to the Holy Land. And then he converted to Islam. And he married a Sefer Torah under chuppah or something like that. So they were much higher level than we were. These people were much smarter than these rabbis. So rabbis are not infallible, and I don't think the Torah tells us that they are. I think the Torah tells us that rabbis aren't any closer to God, not like in other religions. And they need to know that they have a big responsibility over people and to be much more careful. And if you don't know, find out. I'm not a scientist, I don't know. But if I hear a Nobel Prize winner tell me something, or I read something, and then I see thousands of doctors around the world who are saying things that make sense, then I realize, oh, that makes sense. It's just common sense, really. So I think it's a bit of a decree. It's like God made a decree. He's testing us.
So you think that the direction in which people are going is to become more skeptical?
Well, I think they're tired of it here. And I hear more and more people speaking out against how stupid it is. But they also don't want to risk the social pressure. So they're quietly going about their lives breaking rules, but not outwardly protesting.
I heard you told me that there were secret prayer gatherings over the high holidays by the very same people who earlier were very zealous about the lockdown.
Yeah, that is true. That did happen. These were the very same people who were quite religious about COVID restrictions, and then they became apostates to that religion. It is kind of a religion. It's like a cult at this point. That's how I see it. It's a COVID cult. You know, it is. It has its rituals. It has its beliefs. You're good or you're bad if you do the right thing. The propaganda here is so unbelievably full on. Everywhere you go, there's flashing signs: stay safe, do the right thing. Every other commercial, constant, do the right thing. It's like it became a holy cause, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big slogan in Australia. They don't say that in America.
Yeah,
They
the
do that.
premier stands in front of these purple signs. It says, we're all in this together, which is the biggest Orwellian lie ever. Stay home, staying home saves lives. And they just repeat it over and over again. You know, Australia is also an interesting culture in that it's not particularly religious, not like America. It's a very secularized country, although you have religion here, but it's a very secularized country. And it's very materialistic, and it's a bit like people here just want to have a good time and have a nice, comfortable life. So I think there's a big vacuum spiritually. And that's why I think it's so easy to manipulate them, because people are looking for something to have a purpose in. And saving lives, that's a big purpose. You know, you start to feel real good about yourself, feel like you're doing something important.
Well, in general, when people lack deep religious faith, deep meaning in their life, then the government becomes their deity that they worship.
Yes, this is true. So anyway, I think I've spoke enough, spoke a lot, unless you want to ask me anything else.
Okay, thanks.
And I guess we just keep saying what we think. And, you know, I also want to give a shout out to Avi Yemeni. He's done a great job here in Australia. If you want to look up Avi Yemeni, Yemini, in Rebel News, he's on top of it. He's actually had his first victory of a young family was walking somewhere, and the police stopped them, and they went home. They were told, you're out of the bounds of where you're supposed to walk or travel. They said, okay. They went home, and a little while later, they got a fine, and these are huge fines. And for a lot of people, they're very burdensome, and they couldn't pay. So he went to Avi Yemeni's website, fightthefines.com.au, and this is his first victory. It was withdrawn. So he didn't have to pay the fine, went to court. So
yeah, fantastic.
I think it's cruel. I mean, what they're doing to old people.
We just have to keep sharing.
Yeah. We have to keep getting the message out. Sometimes you think you're not getting through, but you don't know. I also think from a religious point of view, it's not a lot of faith if you're going to sit around worrying about when you're going to die or how you're going to die. I mean, you know that 1,182 people died in car accidents last year in Australia. Do we stop driving? It'd be ridiculous.
Yeah. It's all about the propaganda that makes people stop thinking rationally and just react emotionally. That's all it is.
Yep. Well, one of the remedies is don't watch the mainstream media.
Oh, I watch it now. I know that I'm utterly pure propaganda. It has no basis in reality. I should never trust anything in it. So I'm a little more safe in that regard. But
yeah, I don't.
any basis at all.
Yeah, I don't even trust it when they say they have a number of cases. I don't trust it. I don't believe anything they say. I think they make it all up.
They could just make up. They have no limit to the amount that they will lie. They could just make up a big, massive rise or a massive fall or no cases. How could anyone possibly confirm or contradict that claim?
No, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. That's correct. And why do we give up our autonomy so easily and put our lives in their hands? You know,
Yeah.
is it human nature? You know, one can wonder. And you know, all my life, I'm an American. Nobody in my family was in the Holocaust. You know, thank God. But all my life, I always wondered how that happened. And now I know how it happened. It's really scary. I know how it happened now.
Yep. Well, here I am. I'm living in Berlin.
And it's
The exact
freer over
place
there.
where,
It's freer over there than it is over here.
yep,
See, part of the
no
way that
comparison at all.
you know, George Orwell was a great genius. I mean, part of the way that they manipulate people is they pit people against each other. So you've got the business class now is being attacked. So we're in a separate class. And then you've got the government employees, you know, and they're against us. And then you've got people bullying people to do the right thing. So they get everyone pitted against each other. And I think part of the masks is also to take away our humanity. I walk down the street, people say hello to me. I don't know who they are. I can't see who they are. You know, at first, because I wasn't wearing a mask, people would ask me, you know, do you have a mask? I said, I have an exemption. Now I just say it's not your business.
Yeah.
If they don't want me in the store, I don't go.
Masks are classic divide and conquer and classic destruction of people's individuality and turning people into this collective where they just obey and conform, and it's horrific.
So let's just hope that this is just a swinging of the pendulum to the left, and it's going to hopefully get corrected very soon. And people will wake up and it'll be like, wow, that was stupid. We shouldn't do that again.
Yeah. People,
I've actually joined a class action suit against the government. You pay a little money and you're one of a lot of people that are fighting this. There's a few things going on. See, Australians won't necessarily en masse protest in the streets like Americans, but they will do a lot of other things legally, which they are doing.
that's great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, it's been great to you. And
Thank you.
good luck over. I'm glad I don't live in Melbourne.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. Okay, so
we should have Mashiach.
we need Mashiach. Good news. Thank you very much. Kol Tov. Bye-bye.
A little bit.